Now, I wonder if you remember when WA had state ships. That was a government-run shipping service. Now, it did start back in 1912, but it did last until the mid-90s when Richard Court, as Premier, closed it down. And then it was kind of privately run. There was 3 ships that were privately run, and they went from Fremantle to Port Hedland to Broome and Wyndham. That lasted till about 2013. So is it time to bring state ships back, or at least expand our shipping service? Because that conversation started again after flooding cut off the main rail link between east and west, and that caused all sorts of supply issues. Now, Government Task Force has been looking basically at the future of shipping in WA. It was co-chaired by Upper House Labor MP Kyle McGinn, who is with me now. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Nadia. How you going?
Good. So what did you specifically look at?
Yeah, so as you said, we were tasked with looking into supply chains in Western Australia after we've seen the rail go down. And what we specifically looked at in our terms of reference was the capacity for increased use of coastal shipping for interstate and intrastate trade, also provisions for improved training and career pathways for maritime workers, and measures to improve landside supply and supply chain resilience that is cost effective.
Okay, so ultimately, does this mean you're looking at an expansion of our shipping services?
What we were looking at was that our supply chain was vulnerable. We've seen in January 2022 the rail go down, and people would still remember shops that were empty, and that was a real sign that we needed to see how we could add an extra chink to the armour, and shipping for the first time in a long time become part of that conversation. So we were trying to find a way that we could add an extra chink to our supply chain, so ships could be one of them ways in and out of Western Australia, bringing us trade and keeping us and our economy going.
So are we talking about a state shipping service here, or trying to expand what we already have? Because we don't have a lot of ships really that come up and down the WA coast.
That's correct. So at the moment, we don't really have what I would call a coastal trade. We don't really have an internal Australian flagged, Australian crewed fleet that operates around Australia. And that, through our task force, has identified vulnerability that we have. And if we can rebuild and make the environment a lot better for Australian flagged and Australian crewed vessels, we could see a lot more vessels operating internally within Western Australia, but also vessels that are available for when there is an emergency, to which we do have plenty in the Kimberley, for example, when it floods.
Okay. Kyle McGinn's my guest this morning, Upper House MP. He was part of this supply chain task force looking at the future of shipping services. So you seem to be all about wanting to expand it. Are you talking about state ships? Is there any merit in bringing something like that back?
I think what we're looking at now is ships in general. You know, state shipping was, as you said, was taken away back in about the 1970s. And since then, there has been sort of not a real focus on what shipping would look like in Western Australia. So this task force has started right at the bottom, which is what can we do to make state coastal shipping more viable in the state. So one of the big recommendations which the Minister, and I want to thank Minister Rita Saffioti, who jumped onto this task force early, and now the Minister David Michael has continued that work. They are already establishing a policy unit for shipping within Western Australia now in the Department of Transport. That will mean we can start looking into certain opportunities in shipping with maybe it's ships that are currently operating that may look at operating in different routes up and down our coastline, and look at vessels that may be able to switch over to an Australian flag and Australian crewed so that we can call upon them in emergencies. So if we do have an issue with our supply chain, we can direct a vessel to get us more trade. And that is the important part here, is resilience within our supply chain.
What would these ships carry? What sort of things are we talking about here?
They could carry anything. Food, they could carry construction gear, they could carry urgent supplies that are needed in an emergency, sandbags, they could carry dongers for emergency accommodation. There's such a wide range of vessels out there, you know. A good opportunity is a ro-ro vessel, for example, where you can load it up and then it puts its lip down and you can drive things on and off. I also think what we've discovered throughout this about the last year and a half was Aboriginal remote communities suffer a lot from supply chain breakages, particularly when there's floods. If we can have an easier access to potentially delivering urgent goods like food and water to these remote ports within WA, we may be able to get them supplies there easier and cheaper for them.
But isn't shipping slower and more expensive?
No, I don't agree with that comment, because if it's done properly and we look at the volumes of trade that's currently operating around Western Australia that are operating on vessels that are not Australian, so flagger convenience vessels, for example, that are running for international companies, not locally, there is a lot of volume that's operating up and down the coast. There's volume that's coming across on rail at the moment from Sydney to Perth. And as we've seen, when the rail goes down, there's no other way to get that here. Now, if there is an opportunity to have some of that trade singled out onto a vessel that's operating all year round, it could become a viable vessel that is cost effective, and you guarantee it's going to rock up on time.
And Kyle, you talk about having, ships under the Australian flag. I mean, wouldn't that be more expensive, because obviously you'd have to pay crews more, because I mean that's fair, isn't it? That Australian crews would be demanding a lot more money than possibly overseas workers.
Well, the issue at the moment, and I wouldn't say that wages would be the biggest issue. The issue at the moment is that Australian vessels are not competitive with the foreign market on a wide range of things, and one of them being taxation laws. At the moment, with the income tax and the taxation dividends, an Australian vessel is not competitive. So at the moment, I think the federal government, and this is something in our report that we jumped to, is that we think that the Commonwealth government should be looking into our coastal trading regime in a way that it can stimulate the Australian flag. Now, we do know that the federal government is looking at a strategic shipping fleet, which is great timing for us to be working on our task force, because we believe there's some really good opportunities for the strategic fleet here in Western Australia.
You also talk in your report about having first point of entry status for the Broome and Wyndham ports. What would that mean?
Yeah, so at the moment, you don't have first point of entry. So any cargo that comes from overseas that's going to Broome has to go to another port. Now, them ports at the moment would be like Port Hedland, Fremantle, and then they have to travel up on truck and they have to get up to Broome. So I'm really, really pleased with what the Minister, David Michael, has come out with on the first point of entry, because I think this will open up Broome and Wyndham, particularly in the Kimberley, and allow companies and organisations to have better access to imports that are coming, because the Kimberley exports very well, but at the moment they don't have the infrastructure or the biosecurity infrastructure to be able to inspect these vessels and have the resources to manage any of the risk that comes in. So I think the Minister looking at this is a really big win for the Kimberley.
Good to talk to you. Appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much, Nadia.
Kyle McGinn there, Upper House Labor MP there. He was on that government supply chain task force. You like this idea. Anne says shipping's a good idea. If it gets trucks off the road because they cause so much damage, they can carry a lot more goods than trucks. This is a good idea. The Court and David Brand government did a lot of damage closing rail lines, says Anne. Roscoe says we build ships for other countries. Why not for us? Maria says I've travelled on cargo and passenger ships. Would be great along the WA coast. Irene, I want to go to Dr. Elizabeth Jackson. She's been listening, as she's an expert in supply chain management. She's got a bit of a cold. She's got a croaky voice, so just be aware of that. Before I go to Elizabeth, I want to go to Irene. Good morning, Irene. Do you like this idea? More ships?
Well, actually, we used to live in Darwin, and we used to catch the state ships, and they'd call into all the ports and unload the cargo, and you could get off and go and have a look, and it was just a lovely, lovely trip.
How many passengers would be on the state ship?
Oh, look, I can't remember, but, you'd have beautiful dinners and it was just lovely. I can remember some of the captains. There was Captain Aries, and the ships were the Kajara, the Kabali, and I can't remember the other. What was the other one?
Well, Irene, somebody listening will remember it. Hey, thank you. What a lovely memory. I wonder if you, like Irene, used to travel on the state ships all those years ago. I do want to go to Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, Associate Professor of Supply Chain Management. As I said, she's got a bit of a croaky voice, so I don't want to keep you too long. But Elizabeth, thank you for talking to me. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you.
The state of our container ports, will they have to be upgraded to be able to service more ships?
Oh, absolutely. Nadia, our logistics and shipping industry in this state is in a pretty bad way, actually. We've got a lot to do to improve what needs to happen for a state that is as isolated as us within a nation that is as isolated as us. So the upgrades to not only our ports, because of course what comes into a port has to be distributed out of the port. I don't know about you, but I've never been to a port to collect my new laptop computer.
No, no, I have not.
It has to go, of course, to the distribution centre, and then it has to go to the retailer, or it might come directly to our home. So we absolutely, if we're going to upgrade our port infrastructure, we cannot do it without acknowledging the other types of transport that make our lives so lovely and convenient as they are today.
Well, how big's our merchant fleet? What's it at?
Well, I believe it's anywhere between 14 and 10 vessels. The report that came out this week says that it's at 10, that we have 10 vessels in our merchant fleet with Australian flags. 30 years ago, it was 100. And yes, so it is reduced significantly, and this is concerning, particularly because of the geopolitical situations throughout the world at the moment. So we've got, of course, the Ukraine situation, we've got the Middle East situation, but every now and then we hear in Australia about potential crisis between China and Taiwan, for example. Now these are our very near neighbours. And if on the situation that ships are called home, we will need, as an island nation, we will need a great deal more than 10 ships to keep our economy afloat. It is a severe issue of national security.
So is this cost effective?
This is going to be interesting, and I really like this question, Nadia, thank you. That this report is absolutely necessary. What the task force has done and come up with its recommendations are absolutely rock solid. Upskilling labour, strengthening the country's merchant fleet, this is spot on. The next step, however, is going to put the report's recommendations into a plan with a budget. Now, upgrading ports, I think it's intuitive. We've got all these ports in Western Australia doing some great stuff. But the problem is, again, if we go back to my laptop computer, that comes in a container, or my leaf blower, or my outdoor furniture. That comes in a container. Now, really the only substantial port in this state that can operate containers is the Port of Fremantle.
Right, so they're all going to have to be upgraded.
Not only upgraded, but also converted as well. But also don't forget, on top of that, that these ports in our northwest, they're already going hammer and tongs with exporting all the wonderful minerals that come out of the state's north. So how is this actually going to happen? How are we going to squeeze more vessels?
And these are the questions. We're heading up to news. Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, I need to leave it there. I want to give your voice a rest, but thank you so much for talking to me. Regionals, you're off to your local shows. Stay with me, though, because I know a lot of you are ringing about your memories of state ships, and I would love to hear them after 10 o'clock, 1300 222 720. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut Elizabeth off, but I am heading up to the news. It was very good of her to talk to us. She didn't sound well, did she? But she says great things. I do enjoy talking to her. As I said, your memories of state ships, very, very happy to talk to you.